Chapter 55. The social and business worlds of Chicago, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and other cities saw, during the year or two which followed the breaking of his relationship with Jennie, a curious rejuvenation in the social and business spirit of Lester Kane. He had become rather distant and indifferent to certain personages and affairs while he was living with her. But now he suddenly appeared again, armed with authority from a number of sources, looking into this and that matter with the air of one who has the privilege of power, and showing himself to be quite a personage from the point of view of finance and commerce. He was older, of course. It must be admitted that he was in some respects a mentally altered Lester. Up to the time he had met Jennie, he was full of the assurance of the man who has never known defeat. To have been reared in luxury as he had been, to have seen only the pleasant side of society, which is so persistent and so deluding where money is concerned, to have been in the run of big affairs not because one has created them, but because one is a part of them and because they are one's birthright, like the air one breathes, could not help but create one of those illusions of solidarity which is apt to befog the clearest brain. It is so hard for us to know what we have not seen. It is so difficult for us to feel what we have not experienced. Like this world of ours, which seems so solid and persistent, solely because we have no knowledge of the power which creates it, Lester's world seemed solid and persistent and real enough to him. It was only when the storms set in and the winds of adversity blew, and he found himself facing the armed forces of convention, that he realized he might be mistaken as to the value of his personality, that his private desires and opinions were as nothing in the face of a public conviction, that he was wrong. The race spirit or social avatar, the Zeitgeist, as the Germans term it, manifested itself as something having a system in charge, and the organization of society began to show itself to him as something based on possibility, or on possibly a spiritual, or at least superhuman counterpart. He could not fly in the face of it. He could not deliberately ignore its mandates. The people of his time believed that some particular form of social arrangement was necessary, and unless he complied with that, he could, as he saw, readily become a social outcast. His own father and mother had turned on him. His brother and sisters, society, his friends. Dear heaven, what a to-do this action of his had created. Why, even the fates seemed adverse. His real estate venture was one of the most fortuitously unlucky things he had ever heard of. Why? Were the gods battling on the side of him, to him, an important social arrangement? Apparently. Anyhow, he had been compelled to quit. And here he was, vigorous, determined, somewhat battered by the experience, but still forceful and worthwhile. And it was a part of the penalty that he had become measurably soured by what had occurred. He was feeling that he had been compelled to do the first ugly, brutal thing of his life. Jennie deserved better of him. It was a shame to forsake her after all the devotion she had manifested. Truly, she had played a finer part than he. Worst of all, his deed could not be excused on the grounds of necessity. He could have lived on 10,000 a year. He could have done without the million and more which was now his. He could have done without the society, the pleasures of which had always been a lure. He could have, but he had not, and he had complicated it all with the thought of another woman. Was she as good as Jennie? That was a question which always rose before him. Was she as kindly? Wasn't she deliberately scheming under his very eyes to win him away from the woman who was as good as his wife? Was that admirable? Was it a thing a truly big woman would do? Was she good enough for him after all? Ought he to marry her? Ought he to marry anyone, seeing that he really owed a spiritual, if not a legal, allegiance to Jennie? Was it worthwhile for any woman to marry him? These things turned in his brain. They haunted him. He could not shut out the fact that he was doing a cruel and unlovely thing. Material error in the first place was now being complicated with spiritual error. He was attempting to right the first by committing the second. Could it be done to his own satisfaction? Would it pay mentally and spiritually? Would it bring him peace of mind? He was thinking. All the while he was readjusting his life to the old, or perhaps better yet, new conditions. And he was not feeling any happier. As a matter of fact, he was feeling worse, grim, revengeful. If he married Letty, he thought at times it would be to use her fortune as a club to knock other enemies over the head. And he hated to think he was marrying her for that. He took up his abode at the auditorium, visited Cincinnati in a distant and aggressive spirit, sat in council with the board of directors, wishing that he was more at peace with himself, more interested in life. But he did not change his policy in regard to Jennie. Of course, Mrs. Gerald had been vitally interested in Lester's rehabilitation. She waited tactfully some little time before sending him any word. Finally, she ventured to write to him at the Hyde Park address, as if she did not know where he was, asking, "Where are you?" By this time, Lester had become slightly accustomed to the change in his life. He was saying to himself that he needed sympathetic companionship, the companionship of a woman, of course. Social invitations had begun to come to him now that he was alone, and that his financial connections were so obviously restored. He had made his appearance, accompanied only by a Japanese valet, at several country houses, the best sign that he was once more a single man. No reference was made by anyone to the past. On receiving Mrs. Gerald's note, he decided that he ought to go and see her. He had treated her rather shabbily. For months preceding his separation from Jennie, he had not gone near her. Even now he waited until time brought a phoned invitation to dinner. This he accepted. Mrs. Gerald was at her best, as a hostess, at her perfectly appointed dinner table. Alboni, the pianist, was there on this occasion, together with Adam Rascabbage, the sculptor, a visiting scientist from England, Sir Nelson Keyes, and, curiously enough, Mr. and Mrs. Barry Dodge, whom Lester had not met socially in several years. Mrs. Gerald and Lester exchanged the joyful greetings of those who understood each other thoroughly and are happy in each other's company. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself, sir," she said to him when he made his appearance, "to treat me so indifferently? You are going to be punished for this." "What's the damage?" he smiled. "I've been extremely rushed. I suppose something like 90 stripes will serve me about right." "90 stripes indeed," she retorted. "You're letting yourself off easy. What is it they do to evildoers in Siam? Boil them in oil, I suppose?" "Well, anyhow, that's more like. I'm thinking of something terrible." "Be sure and tell me when you decide," he laughed, and passed on to be presented to distinguished strangers by Mrs. D. Lincomb, who aided Mrs. Gerald in receiving. The talk was stimulating. Lester was always at his ease intellectually, and this mental atmosphere revived him. Presently he turned to greet Barry Dodge, who was standing at his elbow. Dodge was all cordiality. "Where are you now?" he asked. "We haven't seen you in, when?" "Mrs. Dodge is waiting to have a word with you." Lester noticed the change in Dodge's attitude. "Sometime, that's sure," he replied easily. "I'm living at the auditorium." "I was asking after you the other day. You know Jackson Dubois?" "Of course you do. We were thinking of running up into Canada for some hunting. Why don't you join us?" I can't, replied Lester. Too many things on hand just now. Later, surely. Dodge was anxious to continue. He had seen Lester's election as a director of the CH&D. Obviously, he was coming back into the world. But dinner was announced, and Lester sat at Mrs. Gerald's right hand. Aren't you coming to pay me a dinner call some afternoon after this? Asked Mrs. Gerald confidentially, when the conversation was brisk at the other end of the table. I am indeed, he replied, and shortly. Seriously, I've been wanting to look you up. You understand, though, how things are now. I do. I've heard a great deal. That's why I want you to come. We need to talk together. 10 days later, he did call. He felt as if he must talk with her. He was feeling bored and lonely. His long home life with Jennie had made hotel life objectionable. He felt as though he must find a sympathetic, intelligent ear, and where better than here? Letty was all ears for his troubles. She would have pillowed his solid head upon her breast in a moment if that had been possible. Well, he said, when the usual fencing preliminaries were over, what will you have me say in explanation? Have you burned your bridges behind you? She asked. I'm not so sure, he replied gravely, and I can't say that I'm feeling any too joyous about the matter as a whole. I thought as much, she replied. I knew how it would be with you. I can see you wading through this mentally, Lester. I've been watching you every step of the way, wishing you peace of mind. These things are always so difficult. But don't you know that I'm still sure it's for the best? It never was right the other way. It never could be. You couldn't afford to sink back into a mere shellfish life. You are not organized temperamentally for that any more than I am. You may regret what you are doing now, but you would have regretted the other thing quite as much and more. You couldn't work your life out that way, now could you? I don't know about that, Letty. Really, I don't. I've wanted to come and see you for a long time, but I didn't think I ought to. The fight was outside. You know what I mean. Yes, indeed I do, she said soothingly. It's still inside. I haven't gotten over it. I don't know whether this financial business binds me sufficiently or not. I'll be frank and tell you that I can't say I love her entirely. But I'm sorry. And that's something. She's comfortably provided for, of course, she commented rather than inquired. Everything she wants. Jennie is of a peculiar disposition. She doesn't want much. She's retiring by nature and doesn't care for show. I've taken a cottage for her at Sandwood, a little place north of here on the lake, and there's plenty of money in trust, but of course she knows she can live anywhere she pleases. I understand exactly how she feels, Lester. I know how you feel. She's going to suffer very keenly for a while. We all do when we have to give up the thing we love, but we can get over it, and we do. At least we can live. She will. It'll go hard at first, but after a while, she'll see how it is, and she won't feel any worse toward you. Jennie will never reproach me, I know that, he replied. I'm the one who will do the reproaching. I'll be abusing myself for some time. The trouble is with my particular turn of mind. I can't tell for the life of me how much of this disturbing feeling of mine is habit, the condition that I'm accustomed to, and how much is sympathy. I sometimes think I'm the most pointless individual in the world. I think too much. Poor Lester, she said tenderly. Well, I understand for one you're lonely living where you are, aren't you? I am that, he replied. Why not come and spend a few days down at West Baden? I'm going there. When? He inquired. Next Tuesday? Let me see, he replied. I'm not sure that I can. He consulted his notebook. I could come Thursday for a few days. Why not do that? You need company. We can walk and talk things out down there. Will you? Yes, I will, he replied. She came toward him trailing a lavender lounging robe. You're such a solemn philosopher, sir, she observed comfortably, working through all the ramifications of things. Why do you? You were always like that. I can't help it, he replied. It's my nature to think. Well, one thing I know, and she tweaked his ear gently, you're not going to make another mistake through sympathy if I can help it, she said daringly. You're going to stay disentangled long enough to give yourself a chance to think out what you want to do. You must. And I wish for one thing you'd take over the management of my affairs. You could advise me so much better than my lawyer. He arose and walked to the window, turning to look back at her solemnly. I know what you want, he said doggedly. And why shouldn't I? She demanded, again approaching him. She looked at him pleadingly, defiantly. Yes, why shouldn't I? You don't know what you're doing, he grumbled. But he kept on looking at her. She stood there, attractive as a woman of her age could be, wise, considerate, full of friendship and affection. Letty, he said, you ought not want to marry me. I'm not worth it. Really, I'm not. I'm too cynical, too indifferent. It won't be worth anything in the long run. It will be worth something to me, she insisted. I know what you are. Anyhow, I don't care. I want you. He took her hands, then her arms. Finally, he drew her to him and put his arms about her waist. Poor Letty, he said. I'm not worth it. You'll be sorry. No, I'll not, she replied. I know what I'm doing. I don't care what you think you are worth. She laid her cheek on his shoulder. I want you. If you keep on, I venture to say you'll have me, he returned. He bent and kissed her. Oh, she exclaimed, and hid her hot face against his breast. This is bad business, he thought, even as he held her within the circle of his arms. It isn't what I ought to be doing. Still he held her, and now when she offered her lips coaxingly, he kissed her again and again. Chapter 56. It is difficult to say whether Lester might not have returned to Jennie after all, but for certain influential factors. After a time, with his control of his portion of the estate firmly settled in his hands and the storm of original feeling forgotten, he was well aware that diplomacy, if he ignored his natural tendency to fulfill even implied obligations, could readily bring about an arrangement whereby he and Jennie could be together. But he was haunted by the sense of what might be called an important social opportunity in the form of Mrs. Gerald. He was compelled to set over against his natural tendency toward Jennie a consciousness of what he was ignoring in the personality and the fortunes of her rival, who was one of the most significant and interesting figures on the social horizon. For think as he would, these two women were now persistently opposed in his consciousness. The one polished, sympathetic, philosophic, schooled in all the niceties of polite society, and with the means to gratify her every wish. The other, natural, sympathetic, emotional, with no schooling in the ways of polite society, but with a feeling for the beauty of life and the lovely things in human relationship which made her beyond any question an exceptional woman. Mrs. Gerald saw it, and admitted it. Her criticism of Lester's relationship with Jenny was not that she was not worthwhile, but that conditions made it impolitic. On the other hand, union with her was an ideal climax for his social aspirations. This would bring everything out right. He would be happy with her as he would be with Jenny, almost. And he would have the satisfaction of knowing that this Western social and financial world held no more significant figure than himself. It was not wise to delay either this latter excellent solution of his material problems. And after thinking it over long and seriously, he finally concluded that he would not. He had already done Jenny the irreparable wrong of leaving her. What difference did it make if he did this also? She was possessed of everything she could possibly want outside of himself. She had herself deemed it advisable for him to leave. By such figments of the brain, in the face of unsettled and disturbing conditions, he was becoming used to the idea of a new alliance. The thing which prevented an eventual resumption of a relationship in some form with Jenny was the constant presence of Mrs. Gerald. Circumstances conspired to make her the logical solution of his mental quandary at this time. Alone, he could do nothing save to make visits here and there, and he did not care to do that. He was too indifferent mentally to gather about him as a bachelor that atmosphere which he enjoyed and which a woman like Mrs. Gerald could so readily provide. United with her, it was simple enough. Their home, then, wherever it was, would be full of clever people. He would need to do little save to appear and enjoy it. She understood quite as well as anyone how he liked to live. She enjoyed to meet the people he enjoyed meeting. There were so many things they could do together nicely. He visited West Baden at the same time as she did, as she suggested. He gave himself over to her in Chicago for dinners, parties, drives. Her house was quite as much his own as hers. She made him feel so. She talked to him about her affairs, showing him exactly how they stood and why she wished him to intervene in this and that matter. She did not wish him to be much alone. She did not want him to think or regret. She came to represent to him comfort, forgetfulness, rest from care. With the others, he visited at her house occasionally, and it gradually became rumored about that he would marry her. Because of the fact that there had been so much discussion of his previous relationship, Letty decided that if ever this occurred, it should be a quiet affair. She wanted a simple explanation in the papers of how it had come about, and then, afterward, when things were normal again and gossip had subsided, she would enter on a dazzling social display for his sake. "Why not let us get married in April and go abroad for the summer?" she asked once, after they had reached a silent understanding that marriage would eventually follow. "Let's go to Japan. Then we can come back in the fall and take a house on the drive." Lester had been away from Jenny so long now that the first severe wave of self-reproach had passed. He was still doubtful, but he preferred to stifle his misgivings. "Very well," he replied, almost jokingly. "Only don't let there be any fuss about it." Do you really mean that? Do you really mean that, sweet?" she exclaimed, looking over at him. They'd been spending the evening together, quietly reading and chatting. "I've thought about it a long while," he replied. "I don't see why not." She came over to him and sat on his knee, putting her arms upon his shoulders. "I can scarcely believe you said that," she said, looking at him curiously. Shall I take it back?" he asked. No. It's agreed for April now, and we'll go to Japan. You can't change your mind. There won't be any fuss. But my, what a trousseau I will prepare." He smiled a little constrainedly as she tousled his head. There was a missing note somewhere in this gamut of happiness. Perhaps it was because he was getting old. Chapter 57. In the meantime, Jennie was going her way, settling herself in the markedly different world in which henceforth she was to move. It seemed a terrible thing at first, this life without Lester. Despite her own strong individuality, her ways had become so involved with his that there seemed to be no possibility of disentangling them. Constantly she was with him in thought and action, just as though they had never separated. Where was he now? What was he doing? What was he saying? How was he looking? In the mornings when she woke, it was with the sense that he must be beside her. At night, as if she could not go to bed alone. He would come after a while, surely. No, of course he would not come. Dear heaven, think of that. Never any more. And she wanted him so. Again, there were so many little trying things to adjust, for a change of this nature is too radical to be passed over lightly. The explanation she had to make to Vesta was of all the most important. This little girl, who was old enough now to see and think for herself, was not without her surmises and misgivings. Vesta recalled that her mother had been accused of not being married to her father when she was born. She had seen the article about Jennie and Lester in the Sunday paper at the time that it had appeared. It had been shown to her at school, but she had had sense enough to say nothing about it, feeling somehow that Jennie would not like it. Lester's disappearance was a complete surprise, but she had learned in the last 2 or 3 years that her mother was very sensitive, and that she could hurt her in unexpected ways. Jennie was finally compelled to tell Vesta that Lester's fortune had been dependent on his leaving her, solely because she was not of his station. Vesta listened soberly and half suspected the truth. She felt terribly sorry for her mother. And because of Jennie's obvious distress, she was trebly gay and courageous. She refused outright the suggestion of going to a boarding school and kept as close to her mother as she could. She found interesting books to read with her, insisted that they go to see plays together, played to her on the piano, and asked for her mother's criticisms on her drawing and modeling. She found a few friends in the excellent Sandwood School and brought them home of an evening to add lightness and gaiety to the cottage life. Jennie, through her growing appreciation of Vesta's fine character, became more and more drawn to her. Lester was gone, but at least she had Vesta. That prop would probably sustain her in the face of a waning existence. There was also her history to account for to the residents of Sandwood. In many cases where one is content to lead a secluded life, it is not necessary to say much of one's past. But as a rule, something must be said. People have the habit of inquiring, if they are no more than butchers and bakers. By degrees, one must account for this and that fact, and it was so here. She could not say that her husband was dead. Lester might come back. She had to say that she had left him to give the impression that it would be she, if anyone, who would permit him to return. This put her in an interesting and sympathetic light in the neighborhood. It was the most sensible thing to do. She then settled down to a quiet routine of existence, waiting what denouement to her life she could not guess. Sandwood life was not without its charms for a lover of nature, and this, with the devotion of Vesta, offered some slight solace. There was the beauty of the lake, which, with its passing boats, was a never-ending source of joy, and there were many charming drives in the surrounding country. Jennie had her own horse and carryall, one of the horses of the pair they had used in Hyde Park. Other household pets appeared in due course of time, including a collie that Vesta named Rats. She had brought him from Chicago as a puppy, and he had grown to be a sterling watchdog, sensible and affectionate. There was also a cat, Jimmy Woods, so called after a boy Vesta knew, and to whom she insisted the cat bore a marked resemblance. There was a singing thrush, guarded carefully against a roving desire for bird food on the part of Jimmy Woods, and a jar of goldfish. So this little household drifted along quietly and dreamily indeed, but always with the undercurrent of feeling which ran so still because it was so deep. There was no word from Lester for the first few weeks following his departure. He was too busy following up the threads of his new commercial connections and too considerate to wish to keep Jennie in a state of mental turmoil over communications, which under present circumstances could mean nothing. He preferred to let matters rest for the time being. Then a little later he would write her sanely and calmly of how things were going. He did this after the silence of a month, saying that he had been pretty well pressed by commercial affairs, that he had been in and out of the city frequently, which was the truth, and that he would probably be away from Chicago a large part of the time in the future. He inquired after Vesta and the condition of affairs generally at Sandwood. "I may get up there one of these days," he suggested, but he really did not mean to come, and Jennie knew that he did not. After a month passed, and then there was a second letter from him not so long as the first one. Jennie had written him frankly and fully, telling him just how things stood with her. She concealed entirely her own feelings in the matter, saying that she liked the life very much and that she was glad to be at Sandwood. She expressed the hope that now everything was coming out for the best for him, and tried to show him that she was really glad matters had been settled. "You mustn't think of me as being unhappy," she said in one place, "for I'm not. I'm sure it ought to be just as it is, and I wouldn't be happy if it were any other way. Lay out your life so as to give yourself the greatest happiness, Lester," she added. "You deserve it. Whatever you do will be just right for me. I won't mind." She had Mrs. Gerald in mind, and he suspected as much, but he felt that her generosity must be tinged greatly with self-sacrifice and secret unhappiness. It was the one thing which made him hesitate about taking that final step. The written word and the hidden thought, how they conflict. After 6 months, the correspondence was more or less perfunctory on his part, and at 8 it had ceased temporarily. One morning, as she was glancing over the daily paper, she saw among the society notes the following item: "The engagement of Mrs. Malcolm Gerald of 4044 Drexel Boulevard to Lester Kane, second son of late Archibald Kane of Cincinnati, was formally announced at a party given by the prospective bride on Tuesday to a circle of her immediate friends. The wedding will take place in April." The paper fell from her hands. For a few minutes she sat perfectly still, looking straight ahead of her. Could this thing be so? She asked herself. Had it really come at last? She had known that it must come, and yet she had always hoped that it would not. Why had she hoped? Had not she herself sent him away? Had not she herself suggested this very thing in a roundabout way? It had come now. What must she do? Stay here as a pensioner? The idea was objectionable to her. And yet he had set aside a goodly sum to be hers absolutely. In the hands of a trust company in LaSalle Street were railway certificates aggregating $75,000, which yielded $4,500 annually, the income being paid to her direct. Could she refuse to receive this money? There was Vesta to be considered. Jennie felt hurt through and through by this denouement, and yet as she sat there she realized that it was foolish to be angry. Life was always doing this sort of a thing to her. It would go on doing so. She was sure of it. If she went out in the world and earned her own living, what difference would it make to him? What difference would it make to Mrs. Gerald? Here she was walled in this little place, leading an obscure existence. And there was he out in the great world enjoying life in its fullest and freest sense. It was too bad. But why cry? Why? Her eyes indeed were dry, but her very soul seemed to be torn in pieces within her. She rose carefully, hid the newspaper at the bottom of a trunk, and turned the key upon it. Chapter 58. Now that his engagement to Mrs. Gerald was an accomplished fact, Lester found no particular difficulty in reconciling himself to the new order of things. Undoubtedly, it was all for the best. He was sorry for Jennie, very sorry. So was Mrs. Gerald, but there was a practical unguent to her grief in the thought that it was best for both Lester and the girl. He would be happier, was so now, and Jennie would eventually realize that she had done a wise and kindly thing. She would be glad in the consciousness that she had acted so unselfishly. As for Mrs. Gerald, because of her indifference to the late Malcolm Gerald, and because she was realizing the dreams of her youth in getting Lester at last, even though a little late, she was intensely happy. She could think of nothing finer than this daily life with him, the places they would go, the things they would see. Her first season in Chicago as Mrs. Lester Kane. The following winter was going to be something worth remembering. And as for Japan, that was almost too good to be true. Lester wrote to Jennie of his coming marriage to Mrs. Gerald. He said that he had no explanation to make. It wouldn't be worth anything if he did make it. He thought he ought to marry Mrs. Gerald. He thought he ought to let her, Jennie, know. He hoped she was well. He wanted her always to feel that he had her real interests at heart. He would do anything in his power to make life as pleasant and agreeable for her as possible. He hoped she would forgive him. And would she remember him affectionately to Vesta? She ought to be sent to a finishing school. Jennie understood the situation perfectly. She knew that Lester had been drawn to Mrs. Gerald from the time he met her at the Carlton in London. She had been angling for him. Now she had him. It was all right. She hoped he would be happy. She was glad to write and tell him so, explaining that she had seen the announcement in the papers. Lester read her letter thoughtfully. There was more between the lines than the written words conveyed. Her fortitude was a charm to him even in this hour. In spite of all he had done and what he was now going to do, he realized that he still cared for Jennie in a way. She was a noble and a charming woman. If everything else had been all right, he would not be going to marry Mrs. Gerald at all. And yet, he did marry her. The ceremony was performed on April 15th at the residence of Mrs. Gerald, a Roman Catholic priest officiating. Lester was a poor example of the faith he occasionally professed. He was an agnostic, but because he had been reared in the church, he felt that he might as well be married in it. Some 50 guests, intimate friends, had been invited. The ceremony went off with perfect smoothness. There were jubilant congratulations and showers of rice and confetti. While the guests were still eating and drinking, Lester and Letty managed to escape by a side entrance into a closed carriage and were off. 15 minutes later, there was a pursuit pell-mell on the part of the guests to the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Depot. But by that time, the happy couple were in their private car, and the arrival of the rice throwers made no difference. More champagne was opened. Then the starting of the train ended all excitement, and the newly wedded pair were at last safely off. "Well, now you have me," said Lester, cheerfully pulling Letty down beside him into a seat. "What of it?" "This of it," she exclaimed, and hugged him close, kissing him fervently. In 4 days they were in San Francisco, and 2 days later on board a fast steamship bound for the land of the Mikado. In the meanwhile, Jennie was left to brood. The original announcement in the newspapers had said that he was to be married in April, and she had kept close watch for additional information. Finally, she learned that the wedding would take place on April 15th at the residence of the prospective bride, the hour being high noon. In spite of her feeling of resignation, Jennie followed it all hopelessly, like a child, hungry and forlorn, looking into a lighted window at Christmas time. On the day of the wedding, she waited miserably for 12 o'clock to strike. It seemed as though she were really present and looking on. She could see in her mind's eye the handsome residence, the carriages, the guests, the feast, the merriment, the ceremony, all. Telepathically and psychologically, she received impressions of the private car and of the joyous journey they were going to take. The papers had stated that they would spend their honeymoon in Japan. Their honeymoon. Her Lester. And Mrs. Gerald was so attractive. She could see her now, the new Mrs. Kane, the only Mrs. Kane that ever was, lying in his arms. He had held her so once. He had loved her. Yes, he had. There was a solid lump in her throat as she thought of this. "Oh dear," she sighed to herself, and clasped her hands forcefully. But it did no good. She was just as miserable as before. When the day was over, she was actually relieved. Anyway, the deed was done and nothing could change it. Vesta was sympathetically aware of what was happening, but kept silent. She too had seen the report in the newspaper. When the first and second day after had passed, Jennie was much calmer mentally, for now she was face to face with the inevitable. But it was weeks before the sharp pain dulled to the old familiar ache. Then there were months before they would be back again, though, of course, that made no difference now. Only Japan seemed so far off, and somehow she had liked the thought that Lester was near her, somewhere in the city. The spring and summer passed. Now it was early in October. One chilly day, Vesta came home from school complaining of a headache. When Jennie had given her hot milk, a favorite remedy of her mother's, and had advised a cold towel for the back of her head, Vesta went to her room and lay down. The following morning she had a slight fever. This lingered while the local physician, Dr. Emery, treated her tentatively, suspecting that it might be typhoid, of which there were several cases in the village. This doctor told Jennie that Vesta was probably strong enough constitutionally to shake it off, but it might be that she would have a severe siege. Mistrusting her own skill in so delicate a situation, Jennie sent to Chicago for a trained nurse, and then began a period of watchfulness which was a combination of fear, longing, hope, and courage. Now there could be no doubt. The disease was typhoid. Jennie hesitated about communicating with Lester, who was supposed to be in New York. The papers had said that he intended to spend the winter there. But when the doctor, after watching the case for a week, pronounced it severe, she thought she ought to write anyhow, for no one could tell what would happen. Lester had been so fond of Vesta. He would probably want to know. The letter sent to him did not reach him, for at the time it arrived he was on his way to the West Indies. Jennie was compelled to watch alone by Vesta's sickbed, for although sympathetic neighbors, realizing the pathos of the situation, were attentive, they could not supply the spiritual consolation which only those who truly love us can give. There was a period when Vesta appeared to be rallying, and both the physician and the nurse were hopeful. But afterward, she became weaker. It was said by Dr. Emery that her heart and kidneys had become affected. There came a time when the fact had to be faced that death was imminent. The doctor's face was grave. The nurse was non-committal in her opinion. Jennie hovered about, praying the only prayer that is prayer. The fervent desire of her heart concentrated on the one issue, that Vesta should get well. The child had come so close to her during the last few years. She understood her mother. She was beginning to realize clearly what her life had been. And Jennie, through her, had grown to a broad understanding of responsibility. She knew now what it meant to be a good mother and to have children. If Lester had not objected to it and she had been truly married, she would have been glad to have others. Again, she had always felt that she owed Vesta so much, at least a long and happy life to make up to her for the ignominy of her birth and rearing. Jennie had been so happy during the past few years to see Vesta growing into beautiful, graceful, intelligent womanhood. And now she was dying. Dr. Emery finally sent to Chicago for a physician friend of his, who came to consider the case with him. He was an old man, grave, sympathetic, understanding. He shook his head. "The treatment has been correct," he said. "Her system does not appear to be strong enough to endure the strain. Some physiques are more susceptible to this malady than others." It was agreed that if within 3 days a change for the better did not come, the end was close at hand. No one can conceive the strain to which Jennie's spirit was subjected by this intelligence, for it was deemed best that she should know. She hovered about, white-faced, feeling intensely but scarcely thinking. She seemed to vibrate consciously with Vesta's altering states. If there was the least improvement, she felt it physically. If there was a decline, her barometric temperament registered the fact. There was a Mrs. Davis, a fine, motherly soul of 50, stout and sympathetic, who lived 4 doors from Jennie and who understood quite well how she was feeling. She had cooperated with the nurse and doctor from the start to keep Jennie's mental state as nearly normal as possible. "Now you just go to your room and lie down, Mrs. Kane," she would say to Jennie when she found her watching helplessly at the bedside or wandering to and fro, wondering what to do. "I'll take charge of everything. I'll do just what you would do. Lord bless you, don't you think I know? I've been the mother of 7 and lost 3. Don't you think I understand?" Jennie put her head on her big warm shoulder one day and cried. Mrs. Davis cried with her. "I understand," she said. There, you poor dear. Now you come with me." And she led her to her sleeping room. Jennie could not be away long. She came back after a few minutes, unrested and unrefreshed. Finally, One midnight, when the nurse had persuaded her that all would be well until morning anyhow, there came a hurried stirring in the sick room. Jennie was lying down for a few minutes on her bed in the adjoining room. She heard it and arose. Mrs. Davis had come in, and she and the nurse were conferring as to Vesta's condition, standing close beside her. Jennie understood. She came up and looked at her daughter keenly. Vesta's pale, waxen face told the story. She was breathing faintly, her eyes closed. "She's very weak," whispered the nurse. Mrs. Davis took Jennie's hand. The moments passed, and after a time the clock in the hall struck 1. Miss Murphy, the nurse, moved to the medicine table several times, wetting a soft piece of cotton cloth with alcohol and bathing Vesta's lips. At the striking of the half hour, there was a stir of the weak body, a profound sigh. Jennie bent forward eagerly, but Mrs. Davis drew her back. The nurse came and motioned them away. Respiration had ceased. Mrs. Davis seized Jennie firmly. There, you poor dear," she whispered when she began to shake. "It can't be helped. Don't cry." Jennie sank on her knees beside the bed and caressed Vesta's still warm hand. "No, Vesta," she pleaded. "Not you. Not you." "There, dear, come now," soothed the voice of Mrs. Davis. "Can't you leave it all in God's hands? Can't you believe that everything is for the best?" Jennie felt as if the earth had fallen. All ties were broken. There was no light anywhere in the immense darkness of her existence.